Randy didn't want to do the song that night. He'd been up partying all night with a couple of girls and a bottle of vodka.
Singer Randy Meisner, whose vocal range helped catapult the Eagles to fame.
Don Henley finally admitted at 77, after years of silence surrounding Eagles co-founder Randy Meisner's death. The shocking news rocked the music world. But what stunned fans even more was Henley's raw, emotional response. After decades of tension, lawsuits, and silence, Henley opens up with regret, reflection, and a tribute no one expected. This is the moment fans never thought they'd see. According to Don Henley, Randy Meisner was born in the modest town of Scottsbluff, Nebraska, a place where time seemed to stretch with the winds that whispered through miles of open farmland. Scottsbluff wasn't a place that screamed fame or spotlight. It was a quiet, rugged community grounded in tradition, where neighbors knew each other by name and work meant long hours under the unforgiving Midwestern sun. Meisner grew up in a family of fruit farmers, where each season dictated the rhythm of life. Apples, plums, and pears weren't just produce. They were survival, livelihood, and legacy. In a household where discipline and effort were essential, Randy was no stranger to the value of hard work. Yet, even among the orchards and early morning routines, young Randy harbored a different kind of dream, one not tied to the soil but to the sky, carried on the wings of melody. Music entered his world not through formal lessons or elaborate instruments but from the static-laced sounds of an old family radio. He was captivated by the rock and roll energy of Elvis Presley, the electric power of Little Richard, and the seamless harmonies of the Everly Brothers. These voices, these rhythms, awoke something in him. They painted a world beyond Nebraska, a world full of noise, lights, and movement. He started modestly, strumming chords on a guitar in his bedroom after school and during quiet summer evenings. But it wasn't long before he discovered the instrument that would become his voice, the bass guitar. There was something about the bass that felt foundational to Randy. "There's something special about playing bass," he once reflected. "You're not just playing an instrument. You're connecting with the music, keeping everything running smoothly." In that groove, he found not just rhythm but purpose. By the time he was a teenager, Randy's aspirations had outgrown the rows of fruit trees. He began performing in local bands, often traveling to nearby towns to play gigs in high school gyms or community centers. While others around him saw music as a pastime, Meisner recognized it as a calling. He practiced relentlessly, absorbing not just how to play but how to perform, how to read a crowd, how to blend harmonies, how to become a piece of something larger than himself. Eventually, the pull became too strong to ignore. With quiet determination and little more than his bass and his ambition, Randy left Nebraska behind. It wasn't an easy decision. Leaving home meant stepping away from familiarity, security, and family expectations. But the road to greatness rarely begins in comfort. He journeyed west, seeking stages, studios, and kindred spirits. Next, according to Don Henley, Los Angeles in the 1960s was more than a city. It was a vibrant, electric haven for dreamers, rebels, and risk-takers. It was a place where ambition filled the air like smog and where music pulsed from every street corner, club, and dimly lit studio. Bars were crowded not just with thirsty patrons but with hungry musicians hoping to catch a break. The Sunset Strip became a pilgrimage site for aspiring artists, and the Laurel Canyon Hills echoed with the sounds of jam sessions and late-night songwriting. For every person who made it, 100 more faded into the background. But to those who came, the possibility of being heard was enough to risk everything. When Randy Meisner arrived in Los Angeles, he brought with him nothing but a bass guitar, a few clothes, and a relentless passion to play. There was no promise of success, no safety net, just an inner fire that kept him moving forward. His first days in the city were humble. He lived cheaply, picked up odd jobs, and performed wherever he could. Dive bars, garage rehearsals, and small-time recording sessions became his new landscape. He blended into the community of musicians who were constantly on the grind, all hoping for that one shot. Meisner's first notable step into the music scene came when he joined a short-lived rock band called The Poor. Though the band never reached major commercial success, it was a crucial learning ground. The Poor gave him experience performing for real audiences, recording in proper studios, and navigating the dynamics of band life. Most importantly, it gave him exposure and credibility in a city where connections often mattered as much as talent. But it was his next move that truly altered the course of his career. Meisner was invited to join Poco, a newly formed band by former Buffalo Springfield members Richie Furay and Jim Messina. Poco was at the forefront of a musical evolution, melding rock with country in a way that was fresh, exciting, and risky. Meisner's melodic bass lines and high, tender harmonies added emotional texture to the band's innovative sound. His vocals became a vital part of Poco's early identity, and his presence was instrumental during their formative recordings. However, just before the release of Poco's debut album, Picking Up the Pieces, tensions began to rise. Despite his significant contributions, Meisner clashed with other members over creative control and was eventually asked to leave the band. His backing vocals remained on the record, but his image and credit were removed from the album sleeve, an emotional blow that stung deeply. It was a hard lesson in the politics and ego that often came with band dynamics in the music industry. Still, Meisner was not one to dwell on disappointment. He moved on quickly and found a place with Rick Nelson's Stone Canyon Band, an ensemble known for its tight musicianship and Nelson's reputation as a seasoned performer. Under Nelson's strict and perfectionist leadership, Meisner refined his craft even further. He learned how to approach music with discipline, how to tour effectively, and how to build a sustainable career beyond fleeting hits. The Stone Canyon Band wasn't the breakthrough Meisner was ultimately seeking, but it gave him valuable insight into what it meant to be a professional, not just a dreamer. Yet, even with growing experience and a modest reputation in the LA scene, Meisner still hadn't found that elusive musical home. There were sparks of connection in each group, but none truly ignited the fire he was looking for. He knew he wanted more creative input, more harmony, more freedom. The pieces hadn't quite come together yet. But Los Angeles had a way of bringing people together, sometimes by chance, sometimes by fate. And for Randy Meisner, that pivotal moment was just around the corner. In the city of stars, where dreams were made and broken every day, his persistence and talent were about to lead him into one of the most iconic bands in rock history. According to Don Henley, 1971 marked a turning point not just for Randy Meisner but for the future of American rock music. That year, rising country rock artist Linda Ronstadt needed a reliable, talented backing band for her upcoming tour. Assembling the right musicians was crucial, and through a network of recommendations and mutual connections in the Los Angeles music scene, 4 men came together: Don Henley, Glenn Frey, Bernie Leadon, and Randy Meisner. What started as a simple touring gig soon evolved into something far more profound. From their very first rehearsals, the chemistry among the 4 was undeniable. Each brought something unique: Henley's rhythm and precision, Frey's charisma and songwriting, Leadon's instrumental versatility, and Meisner's haunting high harmonies and melodic bass. Though their initial role was to support Ronstadt, it quickly became clear that this ensemble had the potential to be much more than a backing band. After the tour ended, the 4 men decided to stay together and form their own group. That decision gave birth to the Eagles, a band that would go on to redefine American rock with their blend of country roots, California harmonies, and rock ambition. If Poco had been a laboratory where Meisner helped test the boundaries of country rock, then the Eagles were the perfected result, a cultural and musical phenomenon. Randy Meisner's contributions to the Eagles were foundational. At a time when the band was still shaping its identity, it was Meisner who provided the high, aching vocal range that gave early Eagles songs their emotional resonance. His bass playing anchored the sound, but it was his voice, clear, vulnerable, and soaring, that often elevated a track from good to unforgettable. Before Don Henley became the band's central vocal force, it was Meisner who carried many of the early lead vocals and defined the band's ability to deliver not just harmonies but heart. Despite his immense talent, Meisner was never one to seek the spotlight. Unlike some of his bandmates, he was more introverted, content to let the music take center stage while he remained in the background. He was a quiet soul in a loud industry, a man who preferred the steady rhythm of his bass and the power of his voice over interviews and ego. His humility only added to the mystique of his performances. He didn't demand attention, he earned it. And then came Take It to the Limit. Co-written by Meisner, Don Henley, and Glenn Frey, the song was deeply personal for Randy. It reflected his own internal struggles with fame, fear, and the desire to push boundaries without losing oneself. When the song was released in 1975, it became one of the defining tracks of the decade and a permanent part of the Eagles' legacy. Meisner's lead vocal performance was breathtaking. His soaring falsetto in the final chorus pushed emotional limits, resonating with audiences around the world. Live, it became a showstopper, a moment when Meisner stepped from the shadows into the full blinding spotlight. However, the song's very success came at a cost. The pressure to replicate that performance night after night, particularly the demanding high notes at the song's climax, weighed heavily on Meisner. Though he delivered unforgettable renditions, his natural modesty and discomfort with the spotlight made performing it a source of anxiety. Tensions within the band, already growing due to fame, schedules, and creative control, were only exacerbated by Meisner's reluctance to be center stage. While the Eagles soared to the heights of global superstardom in the mid-1970s, not every member felt the same sense of triumph. For Randy Meisner, the experience was more complicated, shadowed by growing alienation and quiet frustration. Despite being a founding member of one of the most influential rock bands of all time, Meisner often felt like an outsider in a group dominated by strong personalities and power dynamics. Glenn Frey was brash, confident, and quick to take charge. Don Henley was calculating and visionary, deeply involved in shaping the band's direction. In contrast, Meisner was reserved, more comfortable laying down a groove or harmonizing in the background than engaging in debates over creative control or business decisions. Randy's main passion was the music. He wasn't interested in politics, rivalries, or the spotlight. He wanted to play, sing, and stay true to the art. But as the band's fame grew, so did the pressures of the industry. Massive tours, grueling schedules, constant interviews, and the demand for bigger hits and better performances took their toll. While Frey and Henley increasingly steered the ship, often as a united front, Meisner found himself sidelined in decisions that affected the band's creative direction, recording process, and touring plans. He began to feel marginalized, even silenced in a band he had helped create. The tension that had been simmering for years came to a head in 1977 during the band's Hotel California tour, a critical and commercial high point for the Eagles but a personal low for Meisner. He was physically worn down from the road and emotionally drained from the relentless demands of life on tour. To make matters worse, he had come down with pneumonia, and his voice was hoarse and weak. Night after night, he was expected to hit the impossible high notes of Take It to the Limit, the very song that had cemented his place in rock history but had become a source of dread. One night, backstage before a show, Meisner simply refused to perform the song. He wasn't well, and he didn't feel he could deliver it. Instead of understanding, Glenn Frey erupted. Known for his fiery temperament, Frey confronted Meisner in a volatile clash of egos and emotion. What began as a verbal shouting match quickly escalated into a physical altercation. For the usually mild-mannered Meisner, it was a rare moment of open defiance. Everything was too tense. I was forced to do things I didn't want to do, he later reflected, capturing the emotional weight he had carried for years. That night was more than just a backstage scuffle, it was the breaking point. The tension, the control, the pressure, and the lack of support had finally pushed Meisner past his limit. Not long after the incident, he made the decision to leave the Eagles. It was not a grand, dramatic exit but a quiet and firm withdrawal from a world that had become too overwhelming. To many fans, it was a shock. How could someone walk away from the pinnacle of success? But for Meisner, the choice was essential. It was a return to peace, to authenticity, and to a life less dominated by conflict and expectation. His departure marked the end of an era for the Eagles. While the band would continue and evolve, the original chemistry that had defined their early sound, particularly the unique emotional layer Meisner brought with his voice, was never quite the same. He had been the soul behind some of the band's most tender and haunting moments, and his absence left a gap that couldn't be filled with raw talent alone. According to Don Henley, When Randy Meisner left the Eagles in 1977, he stepped away from not just a band but a structure that had, for better or worse, held his career together. For the first time in years, Meisner found himself without the machine of a major group behind him, no regular studio support, no established songwriting partnership, and no unified vision pushing him forward. While Henley and Glenn Frey launched successful solo ventures with strong teams and commercial strategies, Meisner's post-Eagles journey was far more solitary and uncertain. He did release solo material, including his 1978 self-titled debut album, which included the modest hit Hearts on Fire. His voice was still beautifully intact, soulful, aching, instantly recognizable, but the commercial momentum wasn't there. A follow-up album, One More Song, 1980, featured minor hits like Deep Inside My Heart and the title track, but none of his solo efforts reached the heights fans had hoped for. His reluctance to play the fame game, to sell a persona, or to compete in the changing musical landscape of the 1980s made it difficult to stay in the public eye. And unlike Frey and Henley, Meisner lacked the management network and inner circle needed to thrive in the harsh, fast-paced world of solo artistry. The 1980s and 1990s saw Meisner gradually drift from mainstream visibility. While he occasionally toured, recorded, and joined smaller projects like the group Black Tie, his name became more associated with nostalgia than with new creative output. When the Eagles officially reunited in 1994 for their massively successful Hell Freezes Over tour, it was seen as a historic moment in rock history. Yet Meisner, one of the original four, was conspicuously absent. He wasn't invited to rejoin the band. According to Don Henley, it was a decision based on the complex mix of old tensions, management choices, and Meisner's declining health and reclusive nature. Still, to fans and music historians, it was a painful exclusion. By the 2000s, Randy Meisner had largely withdrawn from public life. The soft-spoken bassist who once stood on the biggest stages in the world was now battling private demons. Health issues began to mount, compounded by emotional and psychological challenges. He struggled with bipolar disorder, a condition that went untreated for years, and he quietly battled alcoholism. Friends and occasional collaborators noted that his once bright spark had dimmed. The industry had long since moved on, and Meisner had no desire, or perhaps no ability, to chase it. In 1996, he married Lana Ray Meisner, a relationship that brought brief stability and companionship. They lived together in Studio City, California, in relative seclusion. However, tragedy struck on March 6, 2016, when Lana Ray died in their home from a gunshot wound. The incident occurred after a domestic disturbance. Though police ruled the shooting accidental, stating that the firearm discharged while she was moving it from a closet, the case drew media attention and public speculation. Controversy swirled around the event, with some questioning the circumstances and others pointing to Randy's fragile mental health as a factor in the confusion surrounding the night. The aftermath of Lana Ray's death had a devastating effect on Meisner. Already battling emotional instability, the trauma sent him into a sharp decline. Reports surfaced of delusional behavior, paranoia, and severe depression. Friends and legal guardians intervened, leading to a conservatorship being placed over Meisner for his safety. In interviews and statements from those close to him, it became clear that Meisner was no longer capable of managing his affairs or maintaining a consistent reality. According to Don Henley, the passing of Randy Meisner on July 26, 2023, marked the end of an era. Meisner died at the age of 77 due to complications from chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD, a condition that had steadily worsened over the years. His death did not prompt massive headlines or star-studded tributes. Instead, it was met with a kind of hushed reverence, a quiet mourning that reflected the man himself, modest, reserved, and largely removed from the spotlight in his later years. For decades, Meisner had been the soft-spoken soul behind some of the Eagles' most stirring harmonies and emotionally charged vocals. Yet, as time passed and the band's mythology grew, his contributions were often overshadowed by the towering figures of Don Henley and Glenn Frey. Still, for true fans and fellow musicians, Randy Meisner's death resonated deeply. He was more than a former Eagle. He was a founding pillar of their sound, a voice of aching vulnerability and unassuming power. It wasn't until days later that Don Henley, who had remained largely silent, broke through the stillness with a public statement. In his tribute, Henley called Meisner an integral part of the Eagles, acknowledging his essential role in shaping the band's early sound and spirit. He pointed specifically to Meisner's performance on Take It to the Limit, a song that had become his signature and, in many ways, a metaphor for his journey through music and fame. That voice, Henley said, was singular, soaring and sincere, full of heartbreak and hope. But beyond the praise, Henley also chose his words carefully. He didn't mention the bitter disputes that had marked the end of Meisner's time with the band, nor did he revisit the fact that Meisner had been excluded from the Eagles' 1994 reunion and subsequent tours. There was no reference to the tension backstage, the fights over control, or the battles Meisner fought privately as the Eagles evolved without him. Yet those omissions spoke volumes. In a poignant interview with Rolling Stone, Henley recalled something Meisner had once said to him in a quiet moment: "I wish I had never joined the band. I hated the fame." That candid confession lingered in Henley's memory. For all the acclaim, the gold records, and the sold-out stadiums, Meisner had never fully embraced the lifestyle that came with stardom. He had loved the music but not the machinery around it. He was not built for celebrity, for the backstage politics, or the demands of the spotlight. His soul belonged more to the open skies of Nebraska than to the glare of arena lights. Henley didn't speak directly about regret. He didn't need to. Between the lines of his tribute, fans and observers sensed an unspoken sadness, a recognition of missed chances, of bonds broken by ego and pressure, and of a legacy that perhaps hadn't been given its full due. Meisner had once stood shoulder to shoulder with Henley, Frey, and Lydon, crafting harmonies that defined a generation. But as the band soared higher, his presence grew quieter until it faded almost completely. The days that followed brought an outpouring of memories from fans, musicians, and those who remembered Meisner's gentle demeanor and towering voice. Rare footage of his performances began circulating again, particularly those moments when he would step to the microphone, close his eyes, and deliver the aching final chorus of Take It to the Limit. Those recordings served as both tribute and reminder that while Randy Meisner may not have sought the spotlight, he had undeniably earned it. In death, as in life, Randy Meisner remained somewhat elusive, a man both essential and overlooked, celebrated and forgotten. But for those who listened closely, his voice still carried across time. It lived in the spaces between Henley's harmonies, in the quiet pain of his ballads, and in the soaring final notes that once brought arenas to their feet. Henley's eulogy, understated and solemn, offered a kind of closure, if not reconciliation, then recognition. A nod to a friend whose light had dimmed too early and whose name, though not always spoken loudly, would forever be woven into the fabric of rock history. What do you think about Don Henley's revelations? Leave us your comments in the section below. We hope you have found this helpful video. Don't forget to leave a like, share, and subscribe to the channel if you like it. Thank you for watching this, and see you in the next videos. Goodbye.